My name is Emma Lynn. I'm 29 years old, and until last fall, I was the only person at Coppergate Solutions who truly understood the back-end systems that kept the company alive. 5 years. That's how long I gave them. I built their infrastructure from scratch before they had any clue what scalability even meant. My fingerprints were on every piece of code, every encrypted tunnel, every API call. I worked late skipped holidays and even came in during my mother's surgery recovery just to keep the system from crashing under Black Friday traffic. And yet, on a random Tuesday morning, they called me into HR. Not for a raise, not for recognition. To let me go. No warning, no transition plan, no severance. Just, we're moving in a new direction. Jared will be taking over your duties. Jared, the intern, 22 years old. His biggest achievement so far was making a Slack bot that told jokes when someone typed stress. I couldn't speak. I sat there with my heart thudding in my ears while the HR rep, some new woman I'd only met once, slid a folder across the table. They didn't even let me return to my desk. An IT guy had already disabled my credentials. A security guard waited outside. I felt my face burning, not with embarrassment, but with shock. They erased me in a single morning. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I glanced back toward the floor where I'd spent 5 years solving problems they didn't even know they had. And all I could think was, they have no idea what they just did. Because here's the thing about being indispensable. They never notice until you're gone. But by then, it's too late. I don't say this out of ego. I say it with the calm clarity that comes when you've finally been snapped awake. For years, I kept that company alive. I did the quiet work, the kind no one applauds unless it fails. I didn't play office politics. I didn't schmooze with the VP during happy hour. I didn't post on LinkedIn about my growth mindset. I just showed up and built a digital fortress, one that only I knew how to navigate. I wasn't stupid. I documented things to a point, but my deep knowledge wasn't in files. It was in my head, in my intuition, in my ability to see a bug before it broke production. You can't teach that in a handover. So while they celebrated their streamlined new org chart and posted photos of Jared with a balloon bouquet welcoming him full-time, I sat at home numb. And then the calls started. Quiet at first. A message from Noah in DevOps. Hey, did you ever document the load balancer overrides Jared's looking? Then one from the new VP Janice. Just a quick question about the internal API tokens I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to be petty. I just couldn't. They cut me out like a tumor. Now they wanted me to play doctor. Still part of me worried, not for them, but for the system I'd built. I didn't want my work trashed by someone who thought copying Stack Overflow answers made him a dev. But I also wasn't ready to help the same people who'd tossed me aside. What they didn't know was that their system had safeguards. Nothing malicious, just smart security. You see, I designed redundancies. Levels of access tied to authentication layers they barely understood. Not out of arrogance, but protection. If anyone went in blind, they could trigger internal locks. I never imagined they'd be foolish enough to try. But a week later, they did. I was eating cereal in my apartment in pajamas when I got the call. Emma. It was David, my old boss voice tight with panic. We need to talk. We've lost access to the main system. I blinked. You what? It's locked. Nobody can push code. The whole deployment pipeline is frozen. Jared says he doesn't know what happened. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the eye of a hurricane, and all I said was, huh. I could hear the desperation in his silence. He expected me to jump in, to save them, to fix the thing they broke when they cut me out. But I didn't. Not that day. Because something inside me had shifted, and that shift, that was the start of everything that came next. I wasn't born a genius. I wasn't some coding prodigy who built her first app at 9 or hacked her school's grading system in high school. I was just a quiet girl who liked puzzles and needed to survive. My mom, Maylene, came to the U.S. from Guangzhou with nothing but a student visa and the kind of grit you only see in people who've stared down real hunger. She raised me alone after my dad left when I was 3, said America had too many bills and not enough dreams. Whatever that meant. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom in Tacoma where I used to sleep behind a curtain in the living room while my mom worked night shifts cleaning offices. She'd come home, exhausted arms sore, but she always smiled. Always told me you'll never need to do what I do. You'll make something big. At 13, I found her old Dell laptop buried in a box of junk someone donated to her work. It barely booted. But after 2 weeks of fiddling with dusty forums and BIOS resets, I made it work. That computer became my world. I didn't have a tutor. I had YouTube Stack Overflow and trial and error. My first Hello World took 2 hours and made me cry with pride. My first successful script, a simple budget calculator to help my mom track expenses, made her cry. She printed it out and taped it to the fridge like it was a diploma. From then on, I lived inside code. It made sense in a way life didn't. Code had logic, rules, predictability. If something broke, there was always a reason. Always a fix. That was comforting when the real world kept breaking in ways I couldn't control, especially when Mom got sick. I was 21 halfway through community college when she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. She told me in the middle of a Safeway aisle between cans of beans and rice. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "I'll be okay," she said even before I asked. But we both knew we couldn't afford not to be. I dropped out that semester and took the first tech job I could land part-time IT support for a friend's startup. I was making $14 an hour and working 60 hours a week taking night classes when I could. I wrote scripts to automate the company's client reports, and when they laid me off a year later, the CTO wrote me a glowing letter. That letter got me in the door at Coppergate Solutions. They were mid-growth, flailing between trying to seem legit and still running dev environments on personal laptops. I joined as a junior systems admin. There were only 6 of us on the back-end team. David, my boss at the time, was sharp, the kind of manager who valued output more than ego. He saw my work pushed me harder and slowly gave me more responsibility. I liked him. He was one of the few who didn't talk down to me or treat me like a diversity hire. Within a year, I was leading my own back-end migrations. By year 3, I had quietly rebuilt the company's cloud architecture, adding redundancies no one noticed because things never went down. That was the point. No one notices the absence of chaos. But I didn't mind. Not at first. I liked being the one behind the curtain. I liked knowing that quietly I was the difference between growth and disaster. I'd see the sales team celebrating big wins in the kitchen and smile knowing those wins only happened because the system didn't crash during peak usage. I didn't need applause. Or at least I told myself I didn't. The truth was, I did want to be seen. Not praised necessarily, but respected. Valued. I wanted someone, David HR, anyone, to look at the backbone of the tech and say, "Hey, we know Emma did that." But instead, I became invisible, especially when the new leadership came in. Janice, the VP of product, arrived around my 4th year, sleek, polished, and sharp as glass. Her first meeting with the dev teams involved a lot of buzzwords, synergy, agility, scaling the team. She talked more about metrics than systems. She called engineers resources. I was polite, kept my head down. But I saw the shift. She wanted a clean org chart. She wanted young, energetic, pliable team members who'd say yes and never ask why. People she could mold. People like Jared. He started as a summer intern from a top-tier program according to her, showed up in expensive sneakers and threw around jargon like microservices and cloud native without understanding either. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, took him under my wing. At first, he seemed grateful, always asking questions, shadowing me during deployments. I even defended him when he pushed broken code to staging. I thought he was just green. I didn't realize he was studying me not to learn, but to replace me. The signs were subtle. Fewer invites to planning meetings. Tasks quietly reassigned. David started looping Jared into 1-1s. When I brought it up, he waved it off. "You've been carrying too much. Let someone else take some weight." And I believed him. Until I didn't. Until I saw Jared present my work to the board during a product demo with no credit. Until I saw Janice nod like she'd just confirmed her golden boy was ready. That was 2 weeks before I was fired. And now, with their system frozen, they wanted me back. Of course they did. Because it turns out some knowledge can't be replaced by ambition. When I think back on that last month at Coppergate, I see it clearly now the way a fog lifts after a storm. All the little signs I ignored. All the gut feelings I silenced. At the time, I chalked everything up to growing pains. We were scaling. Startups get messy. Roles evolve. Teams shift. But the truth is, I was being slowly erased. And the worst part, I helped them do it. It began with the meetings, or rather the meetings I was no longer invited to. David would say, "Oh, this one's more product-focused." Janice would chime in, "We'll loop you in when we get to the technical stuff." The technical stuff was the whole point, but I told myself it was fine. I wasn't a politics person. I didn't care about pitch decks or client-facing language. I just wanted to build systems that worked, so I went back to my terminal. But then my projects started shifting. I was pulled off the internal tools dashboard I'd spent months refining. Jared was taking the lead on it now. I asked why, and David just smiled like I was being difficult. "You've been carrying a lot. Let's spread the knowledge around." That phrase became their new favorite. Spread the knowledge. It sounds so fair, so professional, until you realize it's just a euphemism for dismantle and replace. I tried not to take it personally. I really did. I convinced myself it was part of the company's evolution, that maybe stepping back from code meant I could finally get the promotion they'd dangled for over a year. I started documenting more, handing off pieces of code, hosting brown bag sessions where I walked newer devs through architecture design. I even created internal wikis for things that used to live only in my head. I thought I was being generous, smart, forward-thinking. But what I was really doing was writing myself out of the system. And Jared. He soaked it all in, smiled big in every session, took notes like a model intern, asked smart, flattering questions, the kind that made it seem like he respected me. But then one morning, I opened Slack to find a message thread I wasn't tagged in. Jared had pushed a new version of a configuration script I had written, and he'd overwritten my name in the commit. No, based on Emma's script. No attribution. Nothing. Just his name. And when I brought it up, David told me not to overreact. "Don't worry, it's just an oversight." Except it wasn't. Oversights don't happen 5 times in 1 week. Oversights don't involve Jared presenting a full architecture redesign to Janice, one that mirrored the proposal I'd submitted 3 months earlier, which was ignored at the time. I asked David what was going on. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something honest but couldn't. Instead, he said, "It's not about you, Emma. It's about where we're going as a company." And I felt something break in me, like a thread snapping. Because I'd heard that tone before, back when my mom was let go from her cleaning job because the new manager wanted to bring in his own people. It's a polite way to say you're not in the picture anymore. Still, I didn't confront anyone. I worked late. I stayed quiet. I hoped my loyalty would matter. But loyalty doesn't matter to people who only value optics. And on the day it happened, the day they let me go, it wasn't even David who fired me. It was HR. Janice was nowhere in sight. Jared didn't even look me in the eye as I passed his desk. And David? He sent a single-line email 3 hours later. "Sorry about how this all played out. Wishing you the best." That was it. No thank you. No apology. No ownership. And the kicker. They didn't even know how much they'd lost. They thought I'd documented enough. That Jared was hungry. That the system would just run itself now. But back-end systems don't run on hunger. They run on stability, structure, and understanding. And that understanding. It wasn't something you could download from Confluence. In the first week after I was fired, I felt like I didn't exist. No one called. No one checked in. No, "We're sorry this isn't how it should have gone. I wasn't expecting flowers." But I guess I expected something. Some human decency after 5 years of showing up, building what they needed before they even knew they needed it. Instead, I became a ghost, and the company moved on, or so they thought. I watched from the outside, scrolling LinkedIn through gritted teeth. Jared posted about taking on exciting new challenges. Janice reshared it with a comment about scaling agile leadership through emerging talent. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. The worst part, some of my ex-colleagues liked it, people I'd trained. People who used to message me late at night panicked about deploys. They were all too busy clapping emojis on Jared's posts to even send a private, "Hey, I heard. That sucks. You okay?" Maybe they were scared. Maybe they thought siding with me was dangerous. I don't know, but it hurt. So I did what I always do when life turns cold. I shut down. I stopped checking my inbox. I turned off Slack notifications. I buried myself in old projects, the personal kind I never had time for. I cleaned my apartment until every surface gleamed. I took long walks and ignored the buzzing of my phone. But silence has a strange way of sharpening memories. I kept remembering the look on Jared's face the last time we spoke. It was 2 days before I got fired. We were standing by the coffee machine and he leaned over and said, "You know, you should really think about pivoting into strategy. You're too smart to be stuck doing back-end maintenance." I smiled, confused. "Maintenance?" He shrugged. "Well, I mean, it's great that you built all this, but the real growth's in vision, right? Execution is replicable." Replicable. He looked me in the eye and told me I was replicable, that I was a blueprint, not a builder. I should have seen it coming then, that he thought he'd already absorbed everything I knew, that once he had my documentation, I was obsolete. But here's the thing about blueprints: they don't come with instinct. They don't come with gut checks and edge cases. They don't tell you what not to do. And he was about to find that out the hard way, because 3 days later, the phone calls started. Not from Jared, not from Janice, from Noah. Noah was one of the few back-end engineers left after the restructure, a quiet guy, thoughtful, good with databases, but not great under pressure. "Hey, Emma," he said, voice low and awkward. I hope it's okay I'm calling." "Of course," I said, already feeling a pang in my chest. "What's up?" "There's a weird issue with the logging servers. Like, really weird. Jared tried to reroute traffic after an API call stalled, and now I think something's locked. We can't even see logs anymore." I blinked. "Wait, you lost visibility." "Yeah, the admin keys aren't authenticating, and the fallback script just times out." I stayed quiet. I knew what had happened. It wasn't sabotage, I would never do that. But the system had security layers that assumed a responsible admin, and one of them, a 2-step fallback I designed after a breach simulation, required a secondary handshake process. One I'd never fully documented. On purpose. Not out of malice. Out of caution. It was the kind of safeguard that required experience. The kind of thing you talk through, not write down. Because if you write it down, someone can exploit it. You need someone who understands why it exists, not just what it does. I almost told him. I really did. But something stopped me. I heard someone in the background, a voice I recognized: David. He was whispering, clearly stressed. "Ask her if she has backups. Ask if she can just send the credential tree." I took a breath. "Noah," I said gently, "I'm really sorry this is happening. But I can't help you." He paused. "I get it. I really do. I just thought you'd want to know." I did want to know, but I also wanted them to learn, because they didn't just replace me. They dismissed me. Like I didn't matter, like anyone could do what I did, and now they were realizing the cost of that arrogance. The next day, I got an email from David. Short, tense, formal. "Hi, Emma. Hope you're well. I wanted to reach out personally and see if you'd be open to a quick call. We're encountering some access issues, and I believe your insight could help. Please let me know if you're available. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they did. Just, we're in trouble, come fix it." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I wasn't ready. I wasn't whole yet. I wasn't going to let them yank me back in like a patch update. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to realize exactly what they gave up. And more importantly, I needed to remember who I was without them, because for the first time in 5 years, I had no one to please, no one to protect, no code to deploy for a deadline I didn't believe in. I was free, scared, alone, but free. And that, I realized, was my leverage. The first Monday I didn't have work hit me harder than I expected. I woke up at 7 a.m., like always, muscle memory, and just stared at the ceiling. My apartment was too quiet. No Slack notifications, no Jira tickets, no coffee brewing in the break room, no coworkers pinging me about a server warning. Just me. And the silence. I lay there until almost 10, trying to convince myself I wasn't spiraling. But it's hard to lie to yourself when your body knows better. I finally got up, pulled on a hoodie, and sat down at my desk. the same desk where I used to troubleshoot deployments, debug code, and fix things no one knew were broken. Now I was opening job boards. I thought it would be easy. 5 years of back-end architecture, cloud security, and DevOps management under my belt. Surely someone out there would want me. I had a solid resume, strong GitHub presence, good referrals, well used to have them, and a portfolio of real-world accomplishments. I crafted personalized cover letters, highlighted projects I'd led, detailed achievements. Nothing. Not even a form rejection. After 2 weeks, the silence became a scream. I started questioning everything. Maybe I wasn't that good. Maybe Coppergate was right. Maybe I was too embedded, too inflexible, too resistant to change. Maybe the world really had moved on and left me behind with my well-structured code and my obsession with security. My savings began to dwindle. Rent was due. Mom needed her medications. She never asked, never pressured, but I saw it in her eyes when I called. "You okay, Mamie?" she'd ask softly. "You're quiet." I told her I was fine. Of course I did. That's what you say when your mom already gave everything she had to get you here. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling. I'd built my whole identity around being useful, not just smart useful. I was the one people turned to when things fell apart. I liked being that person. It made me feel secure. And now that I wasn't needed, I didn't know who I was anymore. I started sleeping less, eating less. Nights bled into mornings. I'd sit in front of my laptop for hours, refreshing email, half-starting cover letters, deleting them in frustration. The apartment grew messy. My inbox filled with spam. The plants on my windowsill started to wilt. One night, I found myself back on Coppergate's website. I clicked through their team page like a masochist. Jared's photo had replaced mine. Systems Infrastructure Lead. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the tab and cried for the first time in years. It wasn't about the job. It was the betrayal, the injustice, the feeling of being erased from something I helped build, like they got to keep the house and just pretend the foundation poured itself. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My friends weren't in tech. They didn't understand what it meant to architect systems, to have your code be the bones of a company. They thought I'd find something else soon, but I didn't want something else. I wanted what was mine, and yet, what good would that do? Revenge is for people with power. I was unemployed and invisible. Even if I stormed back in with proof of what I built, what would that fix? I'd be dismissed as bitter dramatic. Another woman too emotional for leadership. So, I said nothing. I sat in the ruins of my own silence and watched the world move on without me. Until one night, sometime around 2 a.m., I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Emma, it's David. Please, we need to talk. It's urgent." I stared at it for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and turned off the light. I knew that if I responded right then, it would be out of fear, out of some leftover sense of obligation. But I also knew that when a system falls apart, eventually someone has to admit they broke it. And when they do, they don't need an intern with buzzwords. They need someone who actually understands what they're doing. But I wasn't going to make it easy, because if they wanted to fix what they broke, they were going to have to feel everything they ignored in me first. It took me 3 days to text David back. Not because I was trying to play games, honestly, I just didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore him entirely. Another part wanted to ask him how it felt to watch the company crumble under Jared's leadership, but mostly I was exhausted. I didn't want to go back. Not physically, not emotionally. I wasn't interested in walking into that same cold meeting room and being treated like a temporary solution to a permanent mistake. I didn't want pity or desperation. I wanted respect. I wanted acknowledgement, and I wasn't sure they were capable of either. Still, curiosity has a way of gnawing through resentment, so I finally replied, "Can you be more specific?" 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I let it buzz 3 times before picking up. "Emma." His voice was tight, rushed, and strained in a way I hadn't heard before. "I'm so glad you replied. What's going on?" He didn't bother with small talk. He just dropped straight into it like he'd been rehearsing. "We're locked out of core systems, not just logging or backups everything. CI/CD deployment, pipeline access management, even customer-facing dashboards. We can't push updates we can't roll back. The site's live but fragile. Every fix we try just breaks something else." I said nothing. He kept going. "Jared's out of his depth. He's trying, but look, Emma, I'm going to be honest with you. We made a huge mistake. We shouldn't have let you go. That was that wasn't my decision, and I didn't fight it like I should have. I'm sorry." It was the first apology I'd heard since this all began. I stayed quiet, let him feel the silence. He finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Would you be willing to come in and help us stabilize things?" That was it. No conditions, no contracts, just help us fix it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not pride, clarity. This was the moment where I got to decide who I was now. I looked around my tiny apartment at the sticky notes of job leads I hadn't followed up on, at the untouched cereal bowl on the counter, at the faded plants on my windowsill. And then I stood up. "David, I said I need a few things before we can talk about that." "Of course," he replied quickly. "Anything. First, I want this in writing, not a text, not a call. A formal email from the CTO acknowledging the scope of the issue and that you're requesting my assistance. Done. Second, if I come in, it's as a contractor. My rate will be triple what I was paid as a full-time employee. No negotiation." He hesitated just for a moment. Then, "Okay. Third, I want full control during the process. I'm not coming in to ask Jared what to do. I'll need root access across all environments, including anything you've siloed off since I left." Silence. Then, finally, agreed. I took a breath. "And finally," I said, "I want a formal statement. Internal naming me as the lead architect on the back-end infrastructure from 2018 through 2023. Full credit, circulated company-wide. This time, the silence stretched long. When he spoke, he sounded smaller. "You deserve that. I'll get it done." I ended the call calmly, politely, but inside my heart was pounding, not from fear, not from hope, from power. I hadn't realized until that moment how much of it I still held. They could lock me out of the office, revoke my badge, erase my Slack history. But they couldn't erase what I knew. They couldn't replicate the way I thought, the way I had built their entire digital nervous system with foresight, intuition, and care. They replaced me with an intern because they thought I was just a tool. Now they were learning the truth. You can't replace a mind with a manual. That night, I stood at my window and watched the city lights shimmer through the glass. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a flame. And I was about to walk back into the building they'd set on fire, not to save it, but to remind them who lit the first match. The morning I walked back into Coppergate Solutions, I didn't dress like someone begging for a job. I didn't wear a stiff blazer or muted colors or try to blend in like I used to. I wore a deep green wrap dress, the one my mom gave me when I got my first promotion, and boots that made a solid echoing click on the lobby's tile floor. My hair was tied back clean and deliberate. No makeup, I didn't need armor. I was the storm. Security buzzed me in. They'd already reactivated my credentials. As the elevator doors closed, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I didn't recognize the woman staring back, and I liked that. This wasn't Emma Lynn, the invisible girl who kept the system alive behind a terminal. This was Emma Lynn, the one they'd forgotten they owed everything to. When I stepped onto the 5th floor, heads turned. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. Just a dozen small moments of surprise eyes darting up from monitors, coffee cups pausing mid-air. The tension in the air was thick like static before a storm. No one spoke to me. No one welcomed me back. And that was fine. I wasn't there for pleasantries. I went straight to the ops room. David was already waiting. He stood as I entered, looking slightly older, more tired than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, his face drawn. He extended a hand. "Emma." "Thank you for coming." I looked at it for a beat, then shook it. "Let's get to work." I sat down at the main terminal, my terminal, though they'd reassigned it, and scanned the system logs. The mess was worse than I expected. Jared had tried to fix a failed deploy by rerouting access permissions. In doing so, he'd tripped 2 security layers I'd designed for internal threat detection. The result, a full lockdown of all root access. They were operating in read-only mode barely. No one touched the vault timers I asked. David shook his head. No one even knew they existed. I nodded once. Good. I got to work. And as I did, something wild happened. I started to enjoy myself again. Not in a petty, vengeful way. Not even in a watch me fix what you broke way. But in a pure, this is what I'm built to do way. I fell back into the rhythm, reading code like a novel, spotting faults in the architecture like hairline fractures in glass, repairing quietly with elegance, rebuilding nodes, testing fallbacks, restoring trust one block at a time. No Jared, no Janice. Just me and the system I knew better than I knew myself. By day's end, I'd mapped the full damage, patched the broken pipelines, and restored internal access with documentation. When I turned to David, he looked stunned. "That would have taken our team a week," he said. I gave a small, tight smile. "Then maybe don't replace an architect with someone who just learned how to use Git last summer." He didn't argue. I stood. "I'll be in tomorrow, and I want the internal acknowledgement email sent out by noon. Full credit. No spin." David nodded quickly. "Of course." As I walked out of the room, I passed Jared in the hallway. He was standing by the kitchenette, holding a La Croix can like it might protect him. We made eye contact. He opened his mouth. I kept walking. He didn't deserve my anger. He didn't deserve anything from me. He wasn't the villain. He was the product of a system that thought enthusiasm could replace experience, that optics mattered more than substance. And I was done being mad. I was focused now, sharper, freer. That night I called my mom. "How's the company?" she asked. On life support, I replied, smiling. "But I'm billing by the hour." She laughed. "You always knew how to fix broken things." "Not always," I said, thinking back on the past few weeks. "But I'm learning." That weekend, I dusted off an idea I'd shelved years ago, an open-source project for a secure, modular backend system that small startups could implement without needing full-time infrastructure teams. I started sketching it out, outlines, logic trees, interface mockups. It felt good to build something for myself, not to be needed, but to create without permission. Coppergate had forced me to remember what I was capable of. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was coding not to survive, but to build my future. Monday morning, I arrived at Coppergate early. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I'd decided if I was going to clean up the mess, I would do it on my own terms without interruption. The acknowledgement email was supposed to arrive by noon. I'd given David very clear instructions it needed to go out company-wide, be from executive leadership, and contain 3 things: that I had been the lead architect of Coppergate's back-end infrastructure from 2018 to 2023, that I had returned in a consulting capacity to resolve the recent system failure, that future credits in system documentation white papers and investor presentations would reflect my authorship, a fair demand, really, considering how much of their product was still standing on the bones of my work. When noon hit, I was still at the terminal fine-tuning load, balancing protocols they didn't even know existed. I refreshed my inbox. Nothing. 12:15 p.m. Still nothing. I leaned back in my chair and closed my laptop. They had until 12:30. At 12:22, the message arrived from the CTO, copied to the entire tech org and C-suite. Subject line: acknowledgement of infrastructure leadership and recent system recovery support. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't emotional. But it was everything I asked for. Every word. I opened the email, read it twice, then stood and walked into the operations room where David and the CTO were reviewing reports. "I'll stay through Friday," I said. "No later. By then, everything will be stable. If you want me longer, we renegotiate." They agreed. No hesitation. By Tuesday afternoon, I had full admin restored. I ran security audits, checked logs, implemented better CI/CD practices, and most importantly, began cleaning the documentation mess Jared had left behind. It was worse than I imagined. He'd copied pieces of my old diagrams, added trendy buzzwords, and left major security holes unaddressed. Things I would never have approved. Things Janice had apparently signed off on because it looked modern and clean. I built a migration plan to undo the worst of it and left clean documentation so that even someone without my instincts could follow it with enough discipline. By Wednesday, I'd also updated my LinkedIn profile, Emma Lynn Backend Systems Architect. Security Strategist. Founder emberthread.io. Coming soon. Previously built, scaled, and salvaged the core backend infrastructure of Coppergate Solutions 2018-2023. I didn't tag anyone, didn't throw shade, didn't even mention what had happened. I didn't need to. People could read between the lines, and they did. My inbox began to fill slowly at first, then in waves. Startups reaching out, CTOs remembering me from panels, women in tech sending quiet, "Thank you for this" messages. Even a recruiter from a security firm I admired offered to schedule a coffee chat. And that's when it hit me I'd let Coppergate define my worth for too long. They were never going to give me the title, the praise, the salary I deserved because I'd made myself too useful in the shadows. They didn't reward stability, they rewarded flash. And I had built their foundation in silence. Not anymore. I spent my evenings working on Emberthread, my open-source platform. I named it after what my mom used to call me when I was little, my Ember, she'd say. Always glowing, even when no one notices. The idea was simple, a modular, secure backend kit for startups that couldn't afford to hire full-time infrastructure engineers. Plug-and-play architecture, smart defaults, actual documentation, built by someone who understood what happens when you build a system that can outlive its creator and how painful that can be if done wrong. By Friday, Coppergate's system was stable, clean, secure, documented. I submitted my final invoice, and I added a 5% late fee penalty clause for each day the payment was delayed. I knew they'd pay it on time. Before I left, David stopped me in the hallway. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. I looked him in the eye. "You owe your future hires better judgment." He nodded to his credit. I walked out without turning back. No cardboard box. No goodbye cupcakes. No tears. Just me, the woman they erased, now known by name. And as the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought they'd replaced me. But what they did was set me free. 3 weeks after my final day at Coppergate, I received an email from Janice. Subject line, follow-up and reflection. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity and maybe a little petty satisfaction made me open it. "Emma, I wanted to personally thank you for the work you did during your time here and your assistance in restoring the system last month. It was above and beyond, and I know the leadership team appreciates your professionalism and talent. I also wanted to extend an invitation for a brief Zoom call if you're open to it. Not official, just honest reflection. We've been reviewing how things unfolded and would value your thoughts. No pressure, of course. Best, Janice." At first, I thought it was damage control. The kind of performative self-awareness execs do when they realize the story's gotten away from them. But the tone was different. Not scripted, not stiff. I hesitated for 2 days. Then I replied, "Let's talk." 15 minutes. Monday at 2:00 p.m. When the Zoom loaded, I kept my camera off for a moment, made her wait. Then I clicked Start Video. Janice appeared polished as ever. Perfect hair, tasteful blouse, eyes slightly tired. Behind her was the same minimalist home office I remembered from team briefings, artless, sleek, and personal. She smiled. "Emma, thank you for doing this." I nodded. 15 minutes. She didn't waste time. "I misjudged you," she said. "Badly." I blinked. I hadn't expected that. She continued. "I bought into the narrative that systems are interchangeable, that if we had the code and the charts, the person behind them was replicable. I was wrong, and I think the company paid for that literally and culturally. I didn't say anything. I wanted her to keep talking." Janice leaned forward. "The way you handled the recovery, it was surgical. You could have sabotaged us, could have watched us burn, but you didn't." I smiled slightly. "Didn't mean I wanted to help you." She laughed awkwardly, honestly. "I deserved that," she said. "We all did. But I'm hoping you'll let me ask something anyway." I nodded once. "What would have made you stay?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. I took a deep breath. "Respect," I said. "Not just for the result of my work, but the process. For the systems I built, the ones you didn't understand but relied on every single day." She nodded. "And visibility," I added. "My name on what I built. Not Jared's, not a bullet point in someone else's slide deck. Janice looked down. I thought silence meant satisfaction, she said quietly. That because you weren't loud, you were fine. I didn't see the problem until it exploded. You didn't see it because you weren't looking, I replied. You were looking for a story that matched your vision. I didn't fit. The call went quiet for a few seconds. Then Janice sighed. Well, she said, if you ever wanted to come back, I don't, I said immediately. Calm, firm, not out of anger, just certainty. I'm building something of my own now. Janice smiled, slightly pained. I figured. I've heard whispers. Ember thread right? I raised an eyebrow. Already reaching your radar. A couple of our competitors mentioned it. They're interested. Good. I ended the call at minute 16. Not to be rude, just to keep the boundary clear. That conversation wasn't closure. It was confirmation. They hadn't replaced me. They'd just learned the hard way that not everything scalable is disposable. That day, I posted something simple to my network systems aren't just code. They're built on trust experience and the intuition of the people behind them. If you treat your builders like disposable tools, don't be surprised when your foundation crumbles. I didn't tag anyone, but the people who needed to see it did. And by then, I was already somewhere else blueprinting a better world, one line of code at a time. A few months later, I found myself on a quiet stage in a small auditorium at a tech leadership summit in Seattle. The lights weren't blinding, the crowd wasn't huge, maybe 50 people, mostly engineers and founders. But my name was on the banner behind me, Emma Lynn Architect Founder Ember Thread. I stood there, palms flat on a podium, facing an audience of people who had come to hear me talk. Not my manager, not my product lead me. The talk was called Invisible Systems, Invisible People. I spoke about infrastructure, yes. But more importantly, I spoke about how companies build systems and forget the humans behind them. How the desire for efficiency can dehumanize the very people who make scale possible. How women, immigrants, introverts, people like me are often celebrated only after they're gone. I didn't mention Coppergate by name. I didn't have to. The story resonated. I could see it on their faces, not just in their nods, but in their posture in the way a few scribbled furious notes during the Q&A. Afterward, a young woman approached me, notebook in hand. I'm working in DevOps at a fintech startup, she said shyly. It's small, but I feel erased sometimes. You made me feel seen. Thank you. I looked her in the eye and smiled. You're not erased. You're building the bones. They'll notice eventually. But in the meantime, document everything. Not for them. For you. That night, I took the train home feeling something I hadn't felt in over a year. Pride not for what I'd fixed for someone else, but what I was finally building for myself. Ember Thread grew faster than I expected. It started as a side project, something to focus my energy after the Coppergate implosion. But word spread. A few former colleagues, the good ones, joined me as contributors. A VC firm reached out after seeing my talk. We didn't need funding yet, but it felt nice to be asked. By winter, early adopters were using our modules in production. Startups that couldn't afford full-time infrastructure engineers were now shipping secure, scalable systems using my blueprints made with intention, transparency, and ethics. I wrote documentation like it was a love letter to my younger self. Every line clear, every decision explained, every module carrying a note designed by people who've been underestimated. I even wrote a small tribute in the repo's README to my mother Maylene, who cleaned buildings so I could build them. She cried when she saw it. One evening, as I was doing final tests before a new release, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Jared. I hovered over it for a long moment before opening. Hi, Emma. I wanted to say congratulations on Ember Thread. It's impressive and inspiring. Also, I'm sorry. For everything. For not realizing the scale of what you'd built. I was too eager to prove myself, and I think I let that blind me. I hope we cross paths again, but either way, I've learned more from this than I ever did in school. Thank you for everything you taught me even when I didn't know I was learning it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things are better left as echoes not because you're bitter, but because you've moved beyond the hallway they live in. 1 year after I walked out of Coppergate for good, I launched Ember Thread 1.0. My name was at the top of every line of documentation. My face was on the homepage. I wasn't a hidden architect anymore. I was the product, the brand, the story. I was no longer building systems for companies that didn't see me. I was building a company that reflected what I'd always known to be true, that people like me, women, children of immigrants, quiet builders, aren't replaceable. We are the foundation. And if the world doesn't understand our value, we'll build our own systems. And this time, we'll make sure our names are carved into every corner.